Well, I have that it is 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 8
Okay. And
o'clock.
do I have 50 minutes or do I have an hour?
Actually, the next session is not until 3 p.m., so you can go as long as you want to, but we had it only booked for an hour. So
That's fine. I'm just going to relax then. And if you guys have questions, you can slow me down because it's really tight what I have. So that would be great if we could maybe just.
Our next session, for those who are in this room now, these are the requisite housekeeping notes. Our next session after this one is at 3 p.m. Central Time. That's on best practices for public notice. Even if that doesn't sound enticing to you, I would encourage you to give it a try. As you know, public notice advertising is very vital to all of our newspapers, and Richard Carpel with the Public Notice Resource Center is going to give us some tips and hints on how to preserve that revenue and content item in our papers. Now, Russell Viers needs no introduction, so I'm not going to drag it out, but he has been a frequent presenter for press associations across the United States on technology and workflow related issues. He's been a good friend to MPA and has been with us a couple of times in recent years. And we wish we were all together today in Jackson at the Hilton Hotel. But as I told Ryan Dorn earlier, this bedroom office here at my house is a whole lot warmer than the Hilton Hotel lobby is. Jim Prince has joined us, and Jim had requested that he be allowed to turn his camera on for this session because Ryan Dorn didn't allow it last hour. So I'm going to turn it now over to Russell. Russell, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. So yeah, I think last time I was there, Lane, we were in Biloxi. You're on mute now.
Yeah, that was a couple of years ago at the convention. And
yeah, and I went over to Queen City and loved it.
Yeah. We unfortunately had to cancel convention last year, but for those who are interested, and I know this question will come up, we have not given up on the idea of an in-person convention in some small scaled down fashion late this summer. So stay tuned for more details.
All right. Well, speaking about the magic of technology, if you guys joined us earlier, you might have heard Lane and me talking. I'm actually presenting live from my Airbnb in Magdeburg, Germany, in the former East German section of the country. So what I want to talk about today is a topic that popped into my head a few months ago. It just seems really timely with newspapers trying to cut budgets and looking at where we can save money. And I hear it all the time. People are sticking with old software because the cost of subscribing to the Adobe Creative Cloud is just, it just doesn't seem like it's an expense item we want to have pinging our credit card every month. So we're curious, what else can we do besides just signing up everybody that's been using Creative Suite, whether it's CS6, CS5, CS4. What can we do? Are there alternatives to that? And there are, and we're gonna talk about that. We're not going to talk about, I'm not going to demonstrate alternative software or talk about pricing as much as I'm going to talk about the concepts of evaluating what you can do and looking at what the alternatives are. So feel free to ask me any questions. Some of them we may just have to table because this is a big topic. In addition to the cost of the software, we've also got this hardware issue that we're facing where maybe you've got CS5 that you've owned for however many years. You bought in a box and you got the discs, and you decided your old computer died, and you bought a new computer. It doesn't have a disk drive anymore. So okay, you buy an external disk drive and you put the disk in, but you realize that the installer was at adobe.com and they don't support it anymore. So now all of a sudden you've got disks you can't even install on your new computer. Raise your hand if you've encountered this kind of stuff. It's real, and it's a real problem that newspapers are dealing with. So I'm going to go through some slides. Again, it's not demonstrating software, it's more talking about concepts. Feel free to unmute yourself and jump in with any questions you've got. I'm going to try to keep this to an hour because I know you've got other things to do. But if you have questions that matter, we can either take them offline, or if they matter for everybody, we can address them here. And if we go a little bit over, Lane's given me permission to do that. So I want to start with what is the Creative Cloud? And you guys probably know this, but just to put it in context, it's this package that Adobe is trying to get everyone to subscribe to that includes basically not just their software, but it's now becoming an environment in which we work. It's got fonts, it's got colors, it's got applications for our phones and iPads, and it's got, you know, there's more to it than just InDesign, Photoshop, and Illustrator. And it's got a monthly fee. A lot of people have the misconception that it works in the cloud, and it doesn't. It actually installs on your machine. It's just that they're not selling you discs and a box anymore. You pay it and then you download it and you install it, and you can still work offline if you need to. There are some services within this cloud that you will need to be online for. So an internet connection is vital to its working, but it's not essential. It's possible to work. I've often worked on airplanes on the apps, and everything worked as I needed, unless there were parts of it that I needed to go to the cloud for. So let's break this down, because it becomes really important to get away from thinking about the cloud as a whole and getting a little bit more granular with this. So I've listed what I consider for most newspapers the 4 most primary applications. And for some newspapers, let's be honest, it's really only 3. There are newspapers out there that have never even launched Illustrator. They don't know what it does. They only use InDesign, Photoshop, and Acrobat. So I've broken it down to the primary apps, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. Now, if it were me and you asked me what my primary apps are, I'm going to take this Bridge Camera Raw and slide it over here to primary. I'm going to take fonts and slide it over here to primary. And I'm going to take device apps and slide that over here to primary. And I'm going to take Lightroom and put it beside device apps, because I use these together. Tomorrow, I'm actually giving a seminar in Iowa on the ecosystem of photo adjustment in this Adobe world, and it's so powerful. And if you're not using it, you're losing time working with your photos. But we'll save that for another day. For today, let's just say that the primary apps we're talking about are InDesign, Photoshop, Illustrator, and Acrobat. So I know some of you may be doing videos, some of you may be building your own web things, and then that's fine. But my experience with newspapers nationwide is very few are actually using these. Okay, so we'll stick with these 4 today. Now, before we ever get to evaluating and buying any software, and I don't care if it's other Adobe software or if it's alternative software, which I'm going to list here in a minute, I think it's more important we look at the job roles instead of the software. Let me give you an example. How many of you remember QuarkXPress and PageMaker days? And when InDesign came out in Labor Day weekend of 1999, we saw newspapers slowly converting over to InDesign or Creative Suite. And I had a lot of newspapers where they just assumed, and it was an assumption, that if I have 10 QuarkXPress users, I need 10 InDesign applications. And so they literally replicated what was on the machines existing with what the new offering was. And a lot of newspapers wasted a lot of money in that move, because the power of InDesign with other software in that Creative Suite that was offered back then replaced the need for that software on every machine. And I'm going to talk about that now, because I think if we look at our job roles, you'll start seeing that maybe we can evaluate and buy the software differently than the way maybe you're thinking you need to adapt to the Creative Cloud. So I just made up some names. We've got Bob, Steve, Marge, and Gladys. And this is a 4-seat, small little newspaper in rural America. Your newspaper may be 2 of these desks or 1. Your newspaper may be 10 of these desks. This is extensible. What we need to do is we need to map out everyone's job roles. What does Bob do? What does Steve do? What does Gladys do? And what does Marge do? And we need to really be honest about what they do, not what they maybe sometimes every 3rd Friday from noon to 1 do, but what do they really do? Okay, because we don't want to spend money on software that is used 1 hour every 3 weeks. There's no reason for that. We'll just reassign that work to someone else. So let's be really honest about what Bob does. Bob proofs pages, okay? Bob does a lot of that. He answers the phone, he takes classifieds and types them in. He takes the calendar information and types that in, and he takes the customer photos as maybe they email him, because Bob is the one who answers info at the Herald Journal Gazette B Freelander.com. And so Bob gets these photos in and he handles those and processes them. And the guy holding up the fish or the dead deer or the metal they just won at the track meet, that's Bob's job. Steve down here, Steve's kind of the photo guy. He's a sports guy. He adjusts photos, places photos on the page, but he also writes sports and he edits, mainly edits sports, but sometimes he gets involved in editing other sections of the paper as needed. Gladys over here, she's that person who's doing everything. She's building the ads, she's adjusting photos. Steve helps her, but she adjusts a lot of photos too. She lays out pages and she creates the PDF. She's the last person to touch it, and she's the one who creates those PDFs for print. And Marge down here, she writes and she edits, and occasionally she lays out pages, but only really when Gladys isn't there. She'll fill in for her. So you need to do this for every single person. And like I say, really look at what their job is. Once you've got that, then you can start looking at what do they need. Well, do they really need the Creative Cloud at $52.99 a month times 4 desks? That's $200 a month for Bob to be able to open an InDesign page and proof it, to be able to type the classifieds in the calendar into the InDesign page for classifieds and calendar. That's a lot of money for Bob to do that. Same with Steve, same with Marge. Gladys, that's probably a pretty good value actually for all that she does. She's using Photoshop, she's using Illustrator, she's using InDesign, she's using Acrobat. So she's using the full power of the suite. She's probably using the fonts. So for her, that's probably not a bad deal. But for the other 3 here, that's a lot of money for what they're doing. It's kind of like my iPhone. I don't know if you guys feel this way, but I wish they'd just make a stripped down iPhone that just made calls, had a camera and a calculator. And maybe it was like $75, because it just feels like I'm spending a lot of money for things I just don't use. And that's kind of what it feels like when you pay that much for the cloud and you're just not using all the apps. So before we get into the actual software alternatives, we have to take a look at this. This is huge. And that is, what is our proficiency level? Okay. The proficiency level of these people here, or these other people at other desks, doesn't matter. But every single employee, what is their proficiency level with the software? Okay. My proficiency level, as much as I use it, is going to be different than somebody who uses it, here and there, or only does one thing. I will tell you that the way I use the software right now, there are 0 alternatives for me to the Creative Cloud. 0. There's absolutely nothing out there that's powerful enough or more powerful than the Creative Cloud for what I'm doing. Okay. So it really matters that you take a look at the proficiency level of your employees. How are they using this software? And let's be honest, guys. I've been a trainer for 24 years, and I've done it all over the world. And I've heard, I can't tell you how many times I've heard, oh, I know InDesign like the back of my hand. And I'll say, well, let me see your files. And the minute I see a file, it's like a CSI episode. I see everything in these files. And I can tell, no, this person doesn't know InDesign like the back of their hand. They're using InDesign like they used Quark 4.1. If you're using Photoshop like you used Photoshop 5.5, and what I mean by that is you open a photo, file open, image mode, or image adjust curves. Maybe you play with the curves. Maybe you sharpen a little bit. Maybe you play with the levels a little brightness contrast, and then you do a save. If you're doing that multiple times on photos throughout the day, you're not maximizing Photoshop. You're not maximizing the Adobe photo adjustment environment. I can take my digital camera and I can go to an event and I can shoot 1,000 photographs. I can come back, download them, and in less than an hour, I can sort through 1,000 photos, get the ones I like, process them, and have them on Facebook. Lane follows me on Facebook. He's seen how many photographs I post, or used to. I haven't been on social media for 7 months, but I used to post a lot of photos, and I work with the photo environment of Adobe a lot, and I'm very fast. But if you're working like we used to in 5.5, that changes the options that you have when you change out that software than what I'm looking for. So it's really important. How are you using this? Illustrator, hey, you're barely using it. Acrobat, you're only opening it to look at customer ads, maybe, or maybe you're using it to its fullest. I don't have an answer for that. You have to answer that. Are you using the Bridge Camera Raw workflow like I do? No. Okay. Well, you're using Photoshop probably more like you did in 5.5, then that changes what's available for you. Are you using the fonts that are in the Creative Cloud? Do you want that? No, you just use the 10 that you have loaded on your machine, then okay, you don't need that. Device apps, what's that? If you're not using any of the device apps, or you're not aware of that technology, then fine. Then we don't need to look for alternatives for that. So you need to find out how you're using the software, because that will dictate which software you look for as an alternative to the Creative Cloud offering. So let's look at some alternatives. Okay, I'm going to throw out some ideas for us to think about as we go through this. So let's start with InDesign. This is the core one. This is the one we use the most. This is the one where we're laying out our pages. Some of you are building ads on. This is our workhorse. Okay. The top application I listed is InCopy, and I'm going to talk about that more at the end of this presentation. InCopy is an alternative for InDesign. Yes, it's an Adobe product. Okay. Yes, it comes with a Creative Cloud. Okay. But get this, guys, it's $5 a month. Okay. InCopy for $5 a month. And it does a lot that you can do with InDesign. Not everything. It's not the same application, but there's a lot you can do with InCopy that you can do with InDesign, and InCopy's $5 a month. So it has to be on this list of alternatives to the Creative Cloud. QuarkXPress, yes, it still exists. Okay, it's still there. It's still alive. They're still developing. They're still coming out with new features. And I never worked for Adobe, ever. And people said, why don't you work for Adobe? And I said, the reason I never worked for Adobe is because I figured if QuarkXPress ever came out with something that was better than InDesign, then I would be, teaching that. Well, they never did. Okay, and I'll be honest with you, QuarkXPress is not as good as InDesign the way I use it. However, it's workable. Okay, I checked today, it's like $487 right now. You need to go to the website, quark.com, and read about, is that for, a year? Is that for ever? And is there a free upgrade? That you have to go to their find out what their pricing is. But it's like I say, I just checked and it was $487 some dollars. Affinity Publisher. Affinity Publisher has been around for a few years. They're improving. I think they have a long way to, not a long way to go. They have a ways to go to get to where I need them to be. But guess what? Right now, Affinity Publisher is like $27. It's on sale right now. If you go to affinity.serif.com, and by the way, side note, Lane, if you can remind me, I'll give you this slide presentation when it's over and people can have this and to refer back to. But if you go to affinity.serif.com, you'll see what they've got there. And they've got 3 apps that apply to us. It's $27 right now on sale. Okay. And that's a one-time purchase. It's not 27 a year, 27 a month, 27, and they hit you up for upgrades. It's just $27. Okay. So depending on how you're laying out your newspaper, depending on what you're doing, that may be everything you need. Seriously, guys, that may be all you need. So go check it out. They are active. They are improving. They're coming up with upgrades. They just came out with another big upgrade. So it's worth at least looking at. Scribus is free. Okay, it's open source software. I have my concerns about open source software. What that means is you've got a bunch of programmers who at no charge are developing software so that you can have it for free and use it. In my mind, I feel like that's not going to develop as quickly as somebody who's trying to make a living from that. For somebody who gets paid to go into work at 8 o'clock and leave at 5 and listen to customers and design things, the design software that we're asking for. But it's an option, and it's worth looking at. Scribus.net. It's free, guys. So check it out. Now, this bottom one may be surprising to you. Maybe thinking, what in the world, Russell? You've lost your mind. How can I lay out a newspaper in Word or Google Docs? And you're not. Please don't. Okay, please don't do that. The reason I put them on the list is because I've seen it with my own eyes, guys. I've seen people typing in InDesign. I've seen people using InDesign as their word processor, as that typewriter, okay? Word and Google Docs do that, number one. That's worth noting. But as I'll talk about later in the presentation, you can link a Word and or Google Docs document. Well, let me rephrase this. InDesign as a standalone product, you can link Word into InDesign. And as you edit in Word, you can update that in InDesign. So it becomes a workflow solution. M Software has a plugin for both Word and Google Docs. Get this, guys, Google Docs, that I can write a story in Google Docs in Germany. You can link it to your newspaper in Mississippi. And as I write, you can be updating that link in the newspaper, in your InDesign document in Mississippi. Okay. And it round trips, meaning that if you format something, it sends it back to me and I see that format. Okay, it's not going to look the same. I don't want to oversell it. The reason I bring it up here is because a lot of newspapers who are using InDesign to type the story and push it on, they can replace that need for that software by just writing the story and other things and linking it to InDesign. Okay. All right. So there's some ideas for alternatives to InDesign. When we switch to Photoshop, man, the doors just blow wide open here. Okay. Notice that I put Photoshop as the first alternative to Photoshop. Okay, that's not a typo. The reason I did that is because Photoshop as part of the Creative Cloud still costs you within that $52.99 or whatever your price is a month. And I'm going to get into this later, but Adobe also offers a Photoshop subscription that's only $9.99 a month. Okay, and that's for Photoshop, Lightroom, Bridge. You get all of those for $9.99. So if you've got somebody like Steve sitting at a computer with the Creative Cloud, but really only using Photoshop most of the time, you can get rid of that Creative Cloud. And one alternative is to just buy the single user Photoshop subscription. So it's an option, okay? Affinity, we're back to Affinity. They have a photo application. It's very robust. Again, if you're using Photoshop like you did Photoshop 5.5, it definitely is robust. So depending on how you're using Photoshop, this $27 Affinity photo app may do everything you need. And there are so many others. I just did some searching the other day, and there's just so much stuff out there. There's stuff that's in the cloud where you upload your photo, and even the interface looks like Photoshop 5. I don't recommend that. I really think that you want apps local. I think that's a prerequisite. You want something that works locally. There's so much out there. And last note here, don't forget to take a look at the software that came with your camera. Depending on your camera, a lot of these manufacturers offer software that is pretty robust for image adjustment, and you may find that's all you need. Keep in mind that this software, whatever you're working with in Photoshop, you're probably going to save it out as a TIFF or a JPEG that goes into whatever you decide to use up here, QuarkXPress, Affinity, or whatever. So you need to find out what they are compatible with. Then you find out what software, what formats these can save into. And I'm going to guess that most of them are going to be pretty typical. Worst case scenario, guys, save it as a JPEG. Everything saves as a JPEG now. So you're probably pretty safe with anything out there. It's a matter of of cost, Mac, Windows, and the functions that you need. Illustrator. Okay. A lot of people don't use Illustrator. I love it. It's actually probably my favorite of all the Adobe products. I'm in there all the time building my ads and art that I work on. The first alternative to Illustrator is I put layout program there because you're probably already doing that. Okay. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a newspaper and they build all their ads in QuarkXPress. They build all their ads in InDesign. And I'm like, well, you got Illustrator right here. Yeah, we don't use it. Why not? Because I don't know how. I don't even know what it is. I didn't even know we had it. Okay, well, it works. You know, newspapers building all of their ads in InDesign or PageMaker or Quark. So a layout program is an alternative to Illustrator. Why pay for Creative Cloud that gives you Illustrator if you're not going to use it? All right. So it's definitely a valid thing to think, do I really need Illustrator? Okay. I personally can't live without it, but your newspaper may have been living without it for the last 20 years. Okay. Affinity, there we are with Affinity again. They have this designer. So they've actually got 3 ads. They've got publish, they've got photo, and they've got designer. And there's your InDesign, your Photoshop, and your Illustrator. And they're trying very hard to take those, to take on Adobe, at least a chunk of that market away. And they're aggressive on price. And they've got a growing customer base. So here we are with Affinity again. And their designer is, again, how are you using Illustrator? If you're a basic Illustrator user, you may find everything you need is right here. Is it Illustrator? No, it's just not. But again, what level are you using it? CorelDraw, how many of you haven't heard that name for 100 years? All right, well, guess what? They're still in it. They're still in the game, and CorelDraw is still a very inexpensive option. There's other apps. There's Sketch, which is Mac only. There's a Gravity Designer. There's Inkwell. The list goes on and on. There's people out there designing, and some of them are cheap and just cheap and cheaper. Some of them out there, and only you can decide if they meet the needs of what you're doing. Okay, but there's a lot out there. These are the top players in that market. When we get into Acrobat and a replacement for Acrobat, this gets really tricky. If you were to Google something like alternatives to Acrobat DC, well, the search engines and the reviews and the articles, they don't know how we're using Acrobat DC. Okay, they may be thinking you're using it for review cycles and commenting. Well, you're not. You know, what you're using it for is simply as a vehicle to deliver art from point A to point B. It's really all we're doing. Okay, our clients are sending us a PDF. We're placing that on a page. We're then creating another PDF to send to our printer. Now, sometimes in there, we need to be able to edit that PDF. You know, maybe they want us to change a phone number. Maybe they want us to resize a little bit. That's when it gets tricky. Okay, that's the tricky part. All right. And there just aren't a lot of alternatives. Illustrator is a good one. So I just put illustration programs right here. I put layout program here because, again, if I'm a newspaper and a client sends me a PDF for the ad, if the layout program allows me to place PDFs, then I may not even need to open that in Acrobat. I may never even use Acrobat. I may go straight from what the customer sent onto that layout program. Now, let's talk about InDesign for a second, and we can throw this out for you to consider for these other programs if you look at them. So InDesign will convert from RGB to CMYK in the export to PDF. So let's say that you're a newspaper doing color pages and somebody sends you a PDF, but it's RGB. Just not a problem. I can place that on the InDesign page and I can export, convert to CMYK based on my printer's specs. It's going to convert to CMYK with the dot gain requirements they've got, the great component replacement they've got, and when they get the PDF, it's going to be a CMYK PDF. So if your layout program that you decide to use, whether you stick with InDesign or you go with Quark, or you go with Affinity, or you look at the others, that's something you have to look at if you're going to replace Acrobat, because you're not going to have it in a Creative Cloud if you don't subscribe. So if you don't have it, what are we going to do when we get an RGB PDF? Well, if the layout program that I'm going to use can't convert to CMYK, now I need to look at other alternatives. And maybe that's an illustration program. Maybe Affinity Design does that for me. Okay, maybe there's something else. If there's other editing you want to do, these programs will do this. I'm not a fan, and I can't stress this strongly enough, I'm not a fan of opening PDFs in Photoshop. All that does is rasterize them, converts the black to CMYK blacks, and you really run the risk of later in the workflow downsampling those PDFs to too low resolution, and they're going to look blurry, and the customers are going to want to make good on that. So I would, if at all possible, avoid opening your PDFs in Photoshop. That's why it's not even on this list, okay? But when I say illustration programs, I'm talking Illustrator, Affinity, Design, those type applications. If it's just reviewing a PDF, maybe you've got somebody who just looks at that to see if it's correct, if there's this or that, or proofing. Reader is free. Okay, you can download Reader, open those PDFs, and look at them and go, yep, that's what the customer wanted. Okay, fine. There are other resources out there. You just need to do some searching to see if they meet the needs that you've got. I will say most alternatives to Acrobat DC are focused on the enterprise need, again, of review cycles, not the newspaper publishing need of PDFs for print. Okay, so when I put others here, this should have been a real, I should have done this in like 6-point type, because it's just not a lot of alternatives for us in the publishing world. Okay, so that's just a quick overview of what might be out there for you guys, if you guys to search for in the 4 key areas of the Creative Cloud. I want to switch gears here a little bit. I want to talk about what you're going to face as you make your conversion, as you start looking at these alternatives. And you guys have heard this before, time is money. Like, it's so true. You know, I work with a lot of people. I'm not just a speaker. I'm not just a trainer. I'm actually on a project right now working, and I've got graphic designers who I work with, and we've got budgets, and I've got hour restraints, and I've got all that stuff that I have to manage. And it's very important to me that the designers who work with me are proficient. So if I see them doing something in a way that's going to take them too much time, it's really important that I step in and I train them on the proper way to do things, because I just don't have the hours for them to do that. Now, to put this in perspective, the document I'm working on right now, it's a government proposal, and when I'm done, it's going to be, I don't know, a couple thousand pages. So I'm managing a couple thousand pages right now of a document where our deadline is in about 10 days. So we've got right now, you know, we've got course infographics in there. We've got text. I've got probably 10 authors that I'm managing right now. I got 2 designers, and then I've got stuff coming in from everywhere, PDFs, Excel spreadsheet. I got all this stuff coming in from all over. We have to manage that. And when I watch somebody working slowly, I need to find a way to help them work faster, and that's through training, or there's a plugin or a software solution or a hardware solution. So don't forget, guys, that and the reason I put this slide up is because there are pros and cons to switching to these alternatives. Okay, the pro, obviously, the thing that's driving us is we think there's going to be a cost savings, right? That $52.99 a month times however many seats is cost prohibitive. So, okay, we're going to save some money. But I made a note here, we may save on the software, but spend it in lost productivity, training, or here's the good one, surprises. And that is those things that you didn't count on, that you used to just count on Photoshop doing, or InDesign doing, or Acrobat doing, and now all of a sudden you realize, oh, it doesn't do that. Okay, so there are some risks that we have to keep in mind as we look at these alternatives. There's going to be a learning curve. I like to think that I'm proficient at the software. I like to think that, and that I've got this knack of opening software and figuring it out quickly. I'll tell you, when I opened the Affinity software, I felt like I was looking at the dashboard of a 747. I'm looking at this, and I'm like, I don't even know where to start. But I did. I did. I eventually was able, okay, I get it. Okay, all right, I get this. All right, now I started building pages in it, and I was able to succeed in building newspaper pages in the Affinity Publish. Their styles, the way their styles work is different than the way you use them in the design. Doesn't make it wrong, it's just different. So I had to learn that, okay? So there's gonna be a learning curve. And when we talk about learning curve, we're not just talking about, okay, there's button A in InDesign that I push. Where's button A in the Affinity Publish or QuarkXPress? I remember many years ago when I was doing a lot of work in Eastern Europe. I was in Russia. I was in Moscow at a newspaper that was like the Wall Street Journal of Russia. And they were asking me, well, we do this in Quark. Show us how to do this in InDesign. And I said, we don't do that anymore. And they just looked at me like I'd hit them in the head with a shovel. They're like, what do you mean? I said, no, watch. Those buttons that you pushed in Quark, they still exist in InDesign, but there's another way to build an InDesign that's twice as fast. And when I showed them how to use that, they were like, oh my God, why would I ever go back to Quark? Like, yeah. So you got to be really careful, not as just a learning curve of knowing where button A is in one and button A is in the other, but also, does Affinity do something better, or does Quark now do something better? And you need to learn all those things, because otherwise you're going to go back to a slide here where I said you use InDesign like you used Quark 4.1. And I tell you guys, I see it all the time. I see people build pages in InDesign just like they did 15 years ago in Quark. And so you're going to have that learning curve, and it's going to take time. It's going to take your employees time, and that's going to cost you some lost productivity, and that turns into money. We've got to think about the compatibility of that software on our systems and our print needs. Okay, you need to test it. Are our existing computers fast enough for that? Do we need new computers? Is there a network issue? You know, is there anything weird about the way it saves to the server? When we export PDFs out of this software, does it work for our printer? Do we need to do something else? Can they convert to CMYK to the printer, or does the printer not need that because the printer has a RIP that converts to CMYK in their process? So we need to work all this compatibility stuff out, okay? What are our infrastructure needs? I had a lady the other day tell me that she was working in InDesign, and she said, yeah, my InDesign did something. And I said, no, InDesign doesn't do that. You must have had a plugin or something. She goes, no, I was doing this in InDesign. I don't remember what it was, but I'm like, yeah, InDesign doesn't do that. She goes, yeah, it did. I'm like, well, I know InDesign did it, but InDesign off the shelf doesn't do that. There's a plugin you have. And a lot of times these plugins are given to us by other people. Like, for example, you know, I might put plugins on the computers of my employees so that they can be more efficient. And I teach them how to use those plugins. All right. Well, now you're going to have to find replacements for those or learn to work around it. So there's a lot going on there. Okay. Even something as simple as actions in Photoshop. Years ago, I was at a newspaper in Omaha, and this guy couldn't work because when he hit F6, F7, and F8, Photoshop wasn't doing what he was trained to do. What had happened is somebody had installed the new version of Photoshop and wiped out his preferences. So the function keys to activate the actions to automatically operate the scanner, adjust the photos, and save them didn't function anymore. And he could no longer work. He literally was shut down until I went to an old computer and I copied those actions over, and then he could work again. He didn't know why it didn't work. And so it could be something as simple as that, is that your people or you have set actions up in Photoshop, and now you switch to Affinity Photo and you're like, we got to set that up again, don't we? Yeah, you do. Okay, so think about those infrastructure needs. We've got legacy files, okay? So we got all these years of InDesign files or PSDs or AI files, so whatever format you're working in. We've got volumes of these. And we need to think about, does the new software open those? Are we gonna have to recreate all of those ads? Are we gonna recreate all of that? So Affinity software, Affinity Publish, for example, opens InDesign files. So that's the stuff you want to look for is, okay, is it important that I be able to open my InDesign files? Because we've got all these ads that we've built and we don't want to have to rebuild them. Yes, it's important. Okay, does Quark open? Does Affinity open? Does Scribus open? No, that means we have to recreate those if we're gonna convert. Like I say, Affinity does, but you know what? I don't know how you build your InDesign files, and I don't know how well they're going to translate that. So the only way to know is for you to test that by opening them, looking at them, editing them, and saying, oh yeah, this is going to work for us, okay? And this is a really important one, is company reliability. Adobe's been there since the beginning. Adobe has been the driver of PDF. They've been the driver of this technology, this world we're in now. Has been driven by Adobe. I don't see them going out of business anytime soon. Quark has been holding on. I'm amazed. They're still in business. I sent an email to a generic email address at Quark a few months ago, and I got an email back from the CEO of Quark. Now, back in the heyday of Quark, that never would have happened. The company has definitely gotten smaller. Now, that could be a good thing. It could mean that now they're more customer driven, that they're more open to listen to our needs, and they're gonna treat us better than they used to. So it could be a good thing that they're smaller, but you have to think about this company reliability. You know, do the research. Is Scribus still going to be developed in the future when it's just free programmers? Is Affinity at $27 for the software? Is that a model that that's sustainable? Okay, and that matters because the last thing you want to do is spend all this time converting and then boom, they're not in business. And so just really think about who it is you're switching to. I think that when you talk about the photo adjustment tools, it's less of an issue because there are so many players out there, and it's a JPEG or a camera raw world. And so I would be less worried about who you signed on with for your Photoshop alternative, because you know what? If you use it for 3 months and you found something better, then you switch. You know, it just isn't that huge of a thing. But when you talk about your page layout program or what you're using to build your ads, that becomes a really important a decision. Is this the software I'm going to be using for a while? So let's map out a quick approach. This is an approach to alternatives. When you decide that, okay, we decided we're going to start seeking alternatives to Creative Suite CS6 or Creative Suite CS5 or whatever it is you've got. Okay. The first thing you want to do is map out your job roles. We talked about that in an earlier slide. Map out your job roles and workflow. And we're going to talk about workflow in the next slide. So just leave that little note floating there. You want to map out your job roles and workflow, because that's going to drive everything, guys. It's going to keep you from buying unnecessary software. It's going to keep you from buying overpowered computers. It's going to keep, there's so much that's going to do. This first step is vital to even looking at switching. Right. Next. All right, let's do the research. Let's review various alternative possibilities. Let's see what's out there. Let's get a feel for it. Okay, Affinity, you got that, I got Quark, this. Let's establish a budget based on what we think the direction we need to go. Okay, where are we going to go with this? It seems like that the Affinity software is going to do what we need to do. So we're going to buy 3 seats of that. We're going to buy 1 publish. We're going to buy 4 photos. We're going to buy, okay, whatever. Put that budget together and look at that. And does that work for you? Okay. All this software, and I say all, there might be exceptions, guys, but most of the software is available as a free trial. Okay. And let's be honest, if the Affinity software is one of them you're looking at, it's $27. It's not going to kill you to cough up $27 to test it, right? I mean, but again, there's a free trial, and I think some of them are 7-day, some are 14 days, some are 30-day. There are some that it's full functioning, but you're not allowed to save without a watermark, and that's important that you be able to save, because you can't tell if Affinity is going to work for you or if QuarkXPress is going to work for you if you can't export a PDF and send that to your printer, okay? And have your printer rip that and tell you if that's workable or not, okay? So when I say test, I don't mean just, throw a couple pictures on the page and put some text on a page and try to format it and go, yeah, it looks pretty good. No, 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 no. You need to build pages. Okay? You need to give someone this task of building real pages. Replicate what you did today in InDesign, replicate that in whatever software you're looking at. Take that and export that to a PDF. Send that PDF to your printer. Have them rip it and tell you if they got any errors, if they got any problems. If they have some form of a proofing device, have them proof your InDesign page and have them proof your alternative page and compare those. You need to test, test, test. This is a major decision you're making here. So you want to test those. Again, the Photoshop replacement, not as vital, right? You can work with it for a few days, and if you realize it's not working, then you can switch. That's more agile. But the page layout and your ad creation tool, very vital that you test it. We need to make an implementation plan at this point, and you don't just flip the switch and everybody goes crazy. On the page layout, for example, start with a page that maybe you can build with a wider time frame, like the editorial page, or maybe there's some back pages that you can start building that aren't as critical time, they're not as deadline sensitive. Start with those. See how those work. Leave the rest of your newspaper in InDesign and send the 2 PDFs or 3 PDFs built in the alternative, send the 2 or 3 in InDesign. If everything's working fine for whatever the length of that phase is, then you add another page or 2 until everything's converted. But don't just say, okay, we're gonna do this. No, that's really risky to do that, okay? Pick a person, pick some pages, pick some ads, pick some photos, really break it down into those little nuggets and test them first live in like I say, in phases. One thing that I like to see happen is to have a very short, and I like these meetings to be stand up. When people are sitting, they tend to just sit and chat longer. Okay. If they're a stand-up meeting, people don't want to be back there. All right. Find a place in the back where it's, nobody wants to go. Have your stand-up meeting there, set up a timer, an egg timer for 20 minutes or 15 minutes and say, okay, weekly meeting, go. What are you seeing happen? Well, we got a call from the printer that we had an ad that didn't convert to CMYK, blah, blah, blah. We did this testing and this fixed that. Okay, good. Any other issues? But I learned a great tip in the new QuarkXPress. Did you know, blah, blah, blah. And it's a great opportunity for you guys to fix as well as learn. Okay, and you're going to be sharing all this information. It's also an opportunity to say, it would really help me a lot if Steve would do this in his documents before sending them over to me, because I have to do a lot of reworking. So if you could just do that, that would be great. Steve says, oh yeah, okay, I can do that. So, and then someone else hears that and says, wait a minute, what are you talking about? With this, oh, I could use that too. Okay, cool. So this group stand-up meeting will really help you very quickly adapt to whatever the new alternatives you're going to switch to. And again, don't stop shopping. There's people coming out with new stuff all the time, especially on the Photoshop side of it. But don't stop shopping. Have somebody just, part of it, kind of keeping an eye on what's out there, what's going on, because you may find that $27 Affinity worked for you for a couple years, but you've outgrown it, and now you're ready to take on this new thing that's come out. So just keep an eye on what's going on out there with new software. Let's talk about this workflow that I was saying, and that is, how does a story, how do pages, how do photos, how do they flow through the office? So you want to map out all current steps of each person's job. Okay, I actually do this a lot. I'm actually hired to go into newspapers and we walk through and we see what everybody's doing and we look for ways to optimize their work, way to speed it up. Okay, so okay, tell me what you do on Monday morning. Well, I do this first. Okay, I write the story. Yeah, but what do you do? I do this. Okay, and we go through that, and it's amazing what we find just in writing that down. But what's more important about this is going to set us up for what we're going to talk about here in just a bit, and that is our software needs. Okay, and so here, evaluate the software needs to accomplish the current workflow. So what we want to do is, what are we doing now? And what software needs to meet those needs now? Let's find that out. Then we ask ourselves, is there a better way? Are we doing this the best way? And we want to look at shifts in roles. Okay. Yes, right now I've got so-and-so doing this, but you know what? It really makes sense if we shift that responsibility to this person over here. They may not want to do it, but that's what makes sense for the company. So we're going to make that shift. Okay. So there might be some shifts in roles. I don't mean entire roles, just partial roles. For example, the person at the front desk may be proofing and answering the phone and typing classifieds and all that, because there was a time years ago when that person had the time to do it. The person didn't really have the time anymore. And now we're paying for them to have software at their desk to proof between answering calls and doing things. So let's just take a look at everyone's roles and go, do they really need to do that now? Because it really doesn't make sense that they're doing that now. It did 10 years ago, but now it just doesn't make that much sense. And let's see if we can shift their roles. Also, the timing. Okay, like, well, what's our deadline for photos? What's our deadline for ads? When do we have that? When do we do these things? And go, well, what if we move this back an hour? Doesn't that allow us to have the story fully edited, really tight in Word before we flow it into the document, versus we flow it in unedited, and now that person has to have the page layout software and they're editing it on the page, and they've got the document open, and since they've got the document open, I can't open it to work on. So I can't place the ads on the page because they've got it open proofing. So I'm sitting here with my arms crossed, waiting for them to finish editing their page. As soon as they're done, then I can put the ads on the page. And then as soon as I'm done, someone else can put the photos on the page. Why are we working that way? Is it possible for us to look at the timing of all of this and say, well, if they focused doing the editing here instead of here, that opens this. Okay, so just take a look at all that stuff. And I've added this location because there are a lot of times in the past, everybody felt they needed to come into the office. I think we've all learned that we can work quite successfully remotely. And we want to see, is it possible to set up a Dropbox workflow? Is it possible to have this kind of a workflow to where that person who proofed pages Wednesday morning from 7 a.m. to noon, and that person has done this for years. Guess what? The only reason that they proof pages Wednesday morning from 7 to noon is because that's when they could. Oh, that's when they had a ride. Okay. Now with Dropbox, they could be proofing the night before. We just gained ourselves an entire morning of production. So we want to find out, why do you work from Wednesday from 7 to noon proofing pages? Oh, well, because that's when I have the car. My husband has the car the rest of the time, or my wife has the car, and that's the only time I can come into town and work. Oh, okay. Let's change that. Okay, so location is a big part of how this workflow fits. And you just need to question everything. And we want to establish a new workflow. Once you've mapped out the new workflow, okay, we want to publish that so everyone knows what the process is, how it flows through, okay? And then we can talk about how we're going to implement the new software use to meet those new the new workflow steps. This is huge. This slide right here, it's huge. I've seen people literally shave days off production just by some simple shifts in the workflow. So now we're back to these 4 desks. I want to play out a couple scenarios now. Okay, so Bob, who we talked about, proofs and answers phones and takes classifieds and does the counter and works with photos. Well, Bob really just needs Acrobat, which is free, to proof the PDFs before they go to the printer, perhaps. Word to take classifieds and take the counter, because if you remember in a previous slide, I told you that it's possible to link the Word document to InDesign. That was if we were using InDesign. Now, if we're not using InDesign, Gladys over here is using Affinity Publish. Well, we can still use Word. Now, there's a cost for Word, but there's also an open source free version of Word that Bob could use to type in the classifieds in the calendar. And then when that's done at a certain time, pushes that over to Gladys to flow through. So we've got a free reader for proofing. We've got free open source version of Word, let's say, for entering the data. And then working with the customer photos, Bridge, which is a part of the Creative Cloud, but it's free. Write that down, guys. Bridge is free. It's so powerful what it can do in working with photos. Bob can take the customer photos and preview them in Bridge. Bob could write metadata in the file info fields of that photo in Bridge. Bob can take give it 5-star, 4-star, 3 stars. There's a lot that Bob can do with the photos in Bridge without even owning Photoshop. Okay, you don't even need Photoshop to be able to preview these photos with Bridge. They loads them on the server or off their thumb drive, looks at them in Bridge and says to the client, because the customer, this is really too low res for us to publish in the paper. Bob can find that out with the free copy of Bridge just by downloading it from adobe.com. Now, Steve down here is also going to use Bridge because it's just so awesome. It's just my favorite tool. Love it. Bob's also going to use, and again, just in this example, Affinity Photo. Man, it's the $27 program, and Steve thinks it just does exactly what he needs. He's going to use Bridge to sort the photos, narrow it down to just the few that he wants to use, and then he's going to use Affinity Photo to edit those photos. And he's going to write his sports stories in Word, and we're going to change the workflow that before Gladys gets any stories to flow into the page, they're going to be edited to a really final state, except for size, in Word. So Steve's also going to do some editing in Word. So now we've got about a $27 investment right here in software. Gladys, on the other hand, again, just in this scenario, is the full Affinity suite. It could also be Affinity Photo, QuarkXPress, and CorelDraw. It doesn't matter, but we've swapped out the Creative Cloud with more stuff for her because she's really using a lot of stuff here. Okay, and we'll talk about the PDF component here in just a bit. We're finding more and more, most applications can save or export to PDF. So the need for distiller is just waning more and more. But again, you need to test that with your printer because every printer's RIP is different. Every printer's workflow is different. So you need to test that. And Marge down here, she does some, lays out some pages. So we're going to go ahead and give her Affinity published too, because it's only $27. And she writes and edits, and she's going to do that in Word. So we're going to have a Word workflow for editorial and then flow that into publish right here. Okay, so this is a scenario that you might come up with after all those previous slides have gone through, and that is, you've remapped your workflow, your job roles, you've evaluated the software, and this is what you've decided. And you can see it's really going to be a hybrid, and you have to think about that. You have to think about how this hybrid is going to work, and you guys have to drive that. I want to get back to Adobe for just a second, and it's important that we understand that on those slides where I said that Adobe products were alternatives to the Adobe Cloud, the Creative Cloud, it's because of this, okay? All apps on the Creative Cloud, $52.99 a month. But let's look down here. There's the photography subscription, which is only $9.99 a month. That includes Lightroom, Photoshop, Bridge, the desktop apps, and all that stuff. That may not mean much to you, but at the very least, you're getting Photoshop for $10 a month. Not an alternative, but the one you've been using for the last 20 years. If on this previous slide, Gladys needs Acrobat Pro for whatever reason, she needs to edit ads at times, she needs this and that. Acrobat Pro is $14.99 a month. So you may find that we want to add Acrobat into this at $4.99 a month. Steve may hate Affinity Photo. He's used it for a couple months. He's like, I just want my Photoshop back. So you may drop Photoshop in here at $10 a month. Okay, so this mix and match can also include some of this Adobe stuff that's in here. Illustrator is $20 a month. InDesign is $20 a month. And InCopy, which I'll talk to a little bit more in a minute, is $4.99 a month, okay, for InCopy. That's the individual prices for these, okay? So now let's look at an Adobe software alternative to the Creative Cloud, okay? So taking what I did 2 slides above with just whatever alternative softwares are out there, and sticking with the software that you're already familiar with, what are the possibilities? Well, Gladys, who's building ads and laying out pages and adjusting photos and making PDFs, I mean, she's just a powerhouse over here. She needs the full Creative Cloud at $52.99. Okay, that's going to be the best value for her. But Bob over here, he can proof, write the classifieds, write the calendar entries, all three of those he can do in InCopy at $4.99 a month. And the customer photos he can work with for the free bridge. Steve down here is going to use Bridge. He's going to use InCopy for writing his stories and doing his edits. And he's going to use the Photoshop subscription for adjusting the photos. Oh, he's also going to use InCopy to place the photos on the page. So now Steve's costing us $15 a month. Marge down here, she writes and she edits. And this is important. We found that even though Marge told me that she lays out pages, she really only does it when Gladys is away, which means that on the rare occasion when she does that, she can walk over here to Gladys's desk and she can work on that. Or let's look at this, and this is really important. This price, all of these prices here, guys, are for one concurrent license on up to 2 machines. Can be Mac, Windows, or mixed. So as long as Marge and Gladys don't work at the same time, they could actually have Creative Cloud installed on both machines. Gladys leaves at 2 in the afternoon. Marge comes in at 2:15. They don't need 2 copies of the Creative Cloud. You can have one installed on both machines, okay? So that's another possibility, is that for her, Marge over here, on the rare occasion she lays out pages, she's got this installed right here, and she just opens that up. Now, if that happened, that we loaded this on both machines, this $4.99 goes away because InCopy is also part of the Creative Cloud. Okay, so you just can't use the software more than one person at the same time, okay? So let's just talk briefly about how this InDesign InCopy works. This project that I'm working on right now, I'm supporting 10 authors and I'm the InDesign guy. So I'm here with the page and I create the pages and I export these InCopy assignments that they work within. No, you can't build a page in InCopy. You cannot add a text box. You cannot add a photo box. You can only edit within the framework that I create on my page. So let's take an editorial page, for example, that stays the same every week. I could open the editorial page, take those blocks that are empty, export those to this person or this person, doesn't matter. It's on the server or on Dropbox. This person can open the page and be writing one of the editorial spaces, while this person has that same page open and is writing into another editorial page. And this person has the same page open and is putting the political cartoon on the page. So 3 people plus me can have the same page open. We just can't work on the same story. This is working on one story. This is working on one story. This is placing the editorial cartoon in another frame. So 4 people are working on the same page simultaneously with this InDesign InCopy workflow, okay? At the same time that's happening, I've got people working in Word or the Google Docs app I talked about earlier, and they're writing, and I've got it linked to my InDesign document, and as they're saving, I'm updating into InDesign, and I'm capturing their changes. Notice that the InCopy arrows have 2 heads on them. The Word arrows only have 1. This is a one-way street. I can pull their changes into InDesign. I can't push typo changes back to them. In this scenario with InCopy, this person can have typos. I can fix those typos, and the next time they open the story, they'll see those corrections. So this scenario, which you see me talk about earlier, InCopy being an alternative to InDesign, means, whereas right now, if you're thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 copies of Creative Cloud, I can't afford that. This scenario here is 1 copy of Creative Cloud, $5, $5, $5, free. Okay, that's a totally different scenario. Another scenario is this person could be placing ads in the spaces that I built on the InDesign page. This person can be writing stories on that same InDesign page. And this person is placing and resizing photos on the same page. So again, the 4 of us are working on the same page. We're just working on different parts of that same page, doing different functions. And again, we're at $52.99, $5, $5, $5. So this totally changes the way we look at how we buy software. So we could go back here and look at alternatives that I've talked about, and I think you should. But this opens the door for us to look at the software we already know and continuing to use it, so we don't have some of those learning curves and surprises that we've talked about. Guys, that's all I've got, and I kept it pretty close to an hour there. Are there any questions that we need to go? Is anybody still here? I should ask that question.
Gosh, you
still
ended
here
up with almost as many people as you started with, Russell. So that's great.
Well, so tell me, this is the first time I've given this. What'd you think? Did you get any out of it?
For me personally, I started working on QuarkXPress in 1989, and I converted to InDesign in 2006. So going by that 15-year timeline in between those, it's time for me to try something else. So I'm going to follow up on a few of these tips.
Okay, good.
Just to stay fresh.
Yeah. And yeah, Quark is one of them. And I think it's maybe 14-day trial. You'll miss Quark. You'll go back and look forward to using it again.
Jennifer Bozeman says, I started PageMaker in 1992 and moved to Quark, and she still hasn't started using InDesign. I never used PageMaker. I escaped that.
I started with PageMaker 1 in 1987. Before that, I used Copy graphic equipment.
Yeah.
And went to PageMaker 1 in 1987, PageMaker 1. And then I went to Quark in 1987. And when InDesign came out in 1999, I switched overnight and tried to stay away from Quark. I tried it. Every version that came out, I would buy it, install it, and test it, and wouldn't use it. Well, I hope that gives your members some information. And here's the thing: is even if they do a lot of those steps that I outlined there and don't change to anything else, they're going to improve their productivity. Some of those things you need to do even if you don't change software.
Well, we've still got 15 people in the room, and we've got ample time before the next session. So if anybody wants to ask Russell a question before we let him get away from us, chime in.
Unmute, join the party. I think they're all asleep, Lane.
I guess you covered everything, Russell. And these folks in here are sharp cookies, I know from looking at the attendee list.
Well, check. Can you guys hear me?
I can. Who's this?
Hey, yeah. So my name's Jared. I work at the University of Mississippi.
Okay.
We use Adobe for doing the student newspaper, the Daily Mississippian here.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem that I'm kind of running into is it seems like Adobe is still the industry standard, far and wide. And it seems like we would be kind of doing a disservice to our students if we were to train them in something other than Adobe. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, and had I known there was going to be the education factor in here, I would have put a slide on that. You're totally right. It's almost like, in a totally different industry, if you remember when a lot of universities taught Final Cut Pro for video. And okay, that's great to give you overall concepts, but if you go out in the job force and they're not a Mac house,
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, how does that help? And so you're definitely right. It's an industry standard, and I'm going to tell you, it will continue to be the industry standard because there's nothing on those lists I showed you that, in terms of the power of what the Adobe can do, can compete. When you talk about an agency, when you talk about major publishing companies, when you talk about this cross-media stuff that we're doing now, there's absolutely no alternative to the Creative Cloud right now. And so, yeah, if I, like this project I'm on right now, if somebody sent me a resume and said, oh yeah, I know Affinity and I know QuarkXPress, I'd be like, okay, that doesn't help me. I got to build 3,000 pages in InDesign in a very short window of time. So as far as academia goes, you are exactly correct that I would not switch from the Creative Cloud. But if I'm a small newspaper in rural America, it's my paper and I'm, it's just me and my staff and it's us, then I think that some of these things are viable alternatives.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree, and I would agree with you that Adobe is at the point where they're kind of too big to fail.
Well, and you know, you brought up another point that I didn't talk about that I'll add for my next time I get this presentation. That is, it is going to be harder for a newspaper to hire anyone who already knows the alternatives they switch to. Okay, so if somebody, let's say that I'm here, I'm in Germany now, and I decide I want to work at the newspaper, and I know the Affinity suite. If I go in and apply for a job, they're probably using Adobe. But let's do the other side of it. Let's say that they're using the Affinity suite, and I go and apply for a job, and I got all this Adobe experience, and they're looking at me and go, "Yeah, we don't use Adobe. We use Affinity." Yeah. So it's going to be any newspapers that are constantly hiring. You need to think about what are the qualifications of the people you're hiring now. Are you finding that you're bringing people in who already have Photoshop knowledge, some InDesign knowledge? If that's what you're doing, you're going to lose that when you switch to some of these alternatives.
Yeah, I see what you're
good
saying.
Point. Good point, Jared. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah. And aside from that, the presentation was great. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, as long as the University of Mississippi says it was a good program, we have done our job.
I'll put that as an endorsement.
No, I'm a Mississippi State guy, but we have a very strong connection to Ole Miss and the School of Journalism and New Media there.
So I'm going to get myself in trouble. Is that the one in Hattiesburg, or is that the one
Southern Miss?
They Oxford?
Ole Miss is in Oxford, Mississippi
Oxford.
State. But all three of those schools we have great relationships with all three of them. So
I just remember I've been to two of them. I spoke at the campus in Hattiesburg years ago, and I spoke at the campus in Oxford, and I didn't remember I didn't remember. I just knew they were universities.
We won't hold it against you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Anybody else? Any other questions or comments?
Lane, if you want to give my email address out, and I can add it to this slide, I'll give you this PDF if they want it. Right. And feel free to give them my email address. And anybody has any follow-up questions, they're welcome to email me.
Okay, great. Well, folks, it's about 1/4 past the hour. We have our next session scheduled for 3 o'clock Central Time this afternoon. That is on best practices for public notices. And I want to tell you all that if there's one thing that keeps press association managers up at night, it is defending public notices, advertising in your newspaper. So we really hope you will join us for that important session at 3 o'clock.
Can I give a public notice factoid?
Absolutely.
Did you know, and tell me if this has changed, but it used to be the case recently, up to recently, I think, and I think it still is, that in South Dakota, it is the law that public notices have to run in 2 newspapers per county. And that's why if you look at the newspapers in South Dakota and some of these rural areas, there are newspapers with circulations of like 600. They're tiny little newspapers, hardly any news, but they stay in business because that public notice is enough revenue that they can stay in business, and it's important to the community and to the county and to the state. But by law, it has to run in 2 newspapers per county.
Right. I am going to take you at your word, Russell, but I'm going to fact check that with Dave Bordewick at the South Dakota.
You should. And tell him I said hi when you do that.
I absolutely will. Russell, thank you so much. It's great to see you, even from this remarkable distance of all the way around the other side of the planet.
5,000 miles.
We hope to have you back in Mississippi someday soon. And we hope to see the rest of you at 3 o'clock. And if not, then starting tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. with tomorrow's sessions. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Lane.
Absolutely.